Hi everyone, Kim Eagles here of Chaos Solutions with today's topic of aspirational clutter. What do I mean by aspirational clutter? Well, that is all the stuff that's taking up space in your home, maybe in your office, that you aspire to someday, maybe, perhaps, either use or want or need. Those are things like old hobbies and crafts and things like that maybe it was something you did 10 years ago, but you're no longer into that particular hobby or you're not doing that type of crafts. But the stuff is still lying around because maybe you'll change your mind and decide that you want to go back to doing that. It's also things like the gizmos and gadgets and those little things that we collect that might come in handy someday. We might need them if we have a certain little thing. Maybe it's a gadget or something in your kitchen or in the garage that maybe someday you might need, maybe. Books are another big one. I see lots of people with these type of things. I don't mean books that are your favorite. I don't mean ones that you've read and that you love and that you'll reread. These ones are the ones that you have not read. Maybe you started reading it, but you never could get into it. So it kind of sits there and you aspire to maybe someday perhaps touch it. So these books and magazines just sit there until someday maybe you'll touch it and you'll decide to read it. Recipes and like recipe books and magazines and things like that kind of go along the same lines. Lots of cooks out there love to collect recipes and magazines and books, or cookbooks and that have all these great recipes, but they never actually use them because they just go back to their tried and true things that they know. And I'm willing to bet nowadays they probably go to the internet when they decide they're going to make a dish with something instead of flipping through all of these recipes. So they aspire to maybe someday touch them, but they never really do. So this is the type of clutter that I call aspirational, and it does take up a lot of space in a lot of people's homes. So I'm going to share with you today 5 questions that I want you to ask yourself about this aspirational clutter to really get you starting to think about whether or not it should stay in your space and whether or not you should honor it by keeping it in there. So the first question to ask yourself is, how long has this clutter been in your space? And my guess is that for a lot of it, you're going to say years. A couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It could be a lot longer than that even. So how many years has that been in there that you haven't actually touched it, or that you haven't really used it, or it's been kind of sitting there? Second question is, if it's been there for 3 years or more, do you really, and I mean really honestly, think that you will ever use it again? Really and honestly. So be honest with yourself. If this is not here, could you live without it? But are you really going to use it? If it's been sitting there for 3 years and you haven't touched it, really? Third question is, if the time comes that you want to use that gizmo or gadget or something like that, or read a book, or read that book, will you be able to find it? So does it have a home, and is it in an organized space where you will easily be able to access it? Or is it just in a big pile somewhere? It's in the house somewhere, and chances are when you decide that you really need it or want it, will you be able to find it? And if the answer is no, you will most likely go out and buy a new one because you can't find it. Fourth question, how much square footage does this stuff take up in your space? If it's an old hobby or something like that, or it's a whole bunch of books, how much square footage does this stuff take up in your space? And figure out how much per square foot your house is worth. So do the math. For all you logical brains there and you're not into the emotional stuff, how much square footage does it take? How much does it cost per square foot in your house? And is that stuff worth that much money per square foot to store? Simple, right? That's part of the logical brain. Is it worth it? And the fifth and final question is, what would your life be like if it didn't exist, if it wasn't in your space? If you actually let that go out of your space, what would your life be like? What would your space be like? What would it feel like? So really think about these questions and think about the stuff that you aspire to maybe someday use, and really be honest with yourself. Is it worth the amount of space that it takes up? You know, are you sacrificing your mental health, your emotional health by having stuff that you're gonna trip over and be frustrated with because there's too much stuff in your house, just because you might maybe someday perhaps use it? I always encourage people to live in the now, live for today, live for who you are today. The hobbies and crafts and things that you did in the past are exactly that. They shaped who you are, they shaped you know, where you've been, but you don't, very rarely do people go back and start up the same thing that they did before. I'm not saying you won't, I'm just saying really think about it. Was that part of your past life? And if it's no longer part of your now, and moving forward, then really think about letting that stuff go, decluttering your space. You'll feel so much better, the energy will flow, and you'll make lots more room to live today. So that's my tip today. Look at that aspirational clutter and see what you can let go of, and how your house would feel without all of that stuff. See everyone later. Happy decluttering.